All right. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining me. We'll go ahead and get started here. If you're on a mobile device, if you're on a larger screen, like a desktop or a laptop computer, should be to the right of the video. So let me scroll down here, see who we'll be starting with today. So I will be starting with John Z. So I start with questions that were asked up to an hour before. So if you're new to office hours, and you want to get your questions answered, right away, come on here an hour before we start and get your questions in there, and then we'll answer it at the start of office hours. The reason why I do that is I just want to try to answer questions for people who I think are here actually waiting to see their question get answered. If you asked your question last night, I'm guessing you're not here waiting to see your question get answered. So yeah, if you ask questions outside of office hours, they're not going to get answered during office hours unless they're in that hour before. So let's go ahead and get started here with John Z. So John Z says, hi, Q, in the downswing, do the arms move initially and then the shoulders, do they move in unison? Your arms aren't going to go down first. We're going to get a shift to our lead side. We're going to get a lateral shift to our lead side. We're going to get some pressure in that lead foot. And then we're going to get that knee starting to push back. And then that hip's going to start to push back. Then your torso is going to start to go. Then your shoulders, then your arms are going to go. I think of it like a gear system that is starting from the ground up, right? So as soon as that first gear starts turning, it's going to slowly get all the other gears turning until lastly, basically the club head gets to the golf ball. So if we were to start the downswing with the arms, right? If we were to go up to the top of the swing and then start the downswing with the arms, well, by that time, the arms are already kind of flying in front of the body. We're not going to be able to use the ground to be able to release the club properly. You're generally going to early release, flip, early extend when you do that. So we want to make sure that we get a good shift to the lead side, get some pressure in that lead foot. So that way you can start the downswing with the lower body. Now, a great drill for that, excuse me, is called the step drill. And what you're doing in the step drill is you're starting with your feet together here, and then you're starting this backswing. As you're starting this backswing, you're actually going to start to step forward, right? So it looks something like this, right? And that may seem counterintuitive to start the backswing or start the downswing in the backswing, start that weight shift, but you're doing it in any athletic movement, right? If you were to throw a ball, your arm would be going back as you're stepping forward. It's the same kind of thing in the golf swing. We initially are going to kind of load up, just like if you were to throw a ball, you start to load up on that trail leg, and then as the arm's going back, you would be going forward, and that way, when you're ready you got this ball in the position you want, you've got momentum and pressure in the ground, so that way you can unwind and let it go. You can create momentum with the lower body to make the upper body go faster. I can create lots of speed by no momentum at all, just swinging my arms in the club. I can create lots of speed, but that's not where you're going to get the most speed, and that's typically where you're not going to get the good impact conditions, meaning you're going to have a hard time getting the hands in front, getting compression on the ball. When you swing all arms, you're basically guaranteed to early release the club. You're going to add loft. You're not going to get the compression you want. You're going to be inconsistent because you're basically forcing the club in front of your body instead of feeling that pulling of the club, towing the club through, which is going to be a lot more stable. So I'd recommend working on the step drill where you put your feet together, start the backswing, start the step, and then when you get that foot on the ground, that's when the downswing starts, when you reach the top, and put that pressure in the ground and let everything kind of unwind. If you would like to see a better demonstration and video for this drill, use the search engine and search BR014. So that's Bob Ryan 014. It's a video. It's called How to Start the Downswing. And Clay will take you through kind of how to do that step drill and explain a lot of other things about starting the downswing as well. So John S. says, how can I improve my shoulder rotation without getting out of sequence? Well, as I mentioned, it's starting from the ground up, right? And this is what we talk about in the power turn course. We want to put pressure into the ground. That's going to turn our hips. That's going to turn our shoulders and allow you to get in this good hip and shoulder rotation at the top. So really what you need to do, it sounds like, is work through the drills in the power turn course to help you to get in a better position at the top. Because if you're out of sequence, then it's because you have, depends on what exactly is out of sequence, right? So that step drill may be a good drill for you too, John. It just depends on what exactly is out of sequence. But I'd recommend working through the power turn course. And, you can overdo it. You can get to where, if you're really out of sequence, it's likely because something else is out of the way, right? So what I see a lot of people do, now I'm not saying this is what you're doing, John S., but what I see a lot of people do in an effort to get a bigger shoulder turn is they will actually lean their body toward the target at the top. And that does make the swing longer because I'm really extending my back and losing my spine angle. But the problem is that's going to make things very difficult to sequence correctly in the downswing. What I want to make sure that I'm doing is I'm staying nice and angled away with my spine as I get up to the top. I'm still extending some, but if you're extending too much, that's where you're going to get into trouble. So Daniel B says, I'm working through the move section and studying my swing in slow motion down the target line. I'm parallel to the hosel elbow plane in the downswing. Okay, but I'm not clearly below it. Is there any other relevant lines plane to work for when taking video down the line? I have a steep swing and I aim to get more shallow and into out path. Really, the elbow plane is really all you need. I would just try to get under it as much as you possibly can, right? And then rotate as much as you possibly can with that. And as long as you're getting underneath the elbow plane, you have that camera angle correct, then you're going to be good. You don't need to complicate it, right? The elbow plane is really a good indication. What I would recommend doing is I would take a tour player that you like, and then look and that you feel like you share some similar things in your swing. And I would go look at their down the line view on YouTube. There are tons of videos of tour players. I just make sure that the camera angle is the same, right? And I would kind of see where they are with their elbow plane, and I just try to match that, or get something very close to that. So I wouldn't overcomplicate it. There's not any more lines and things you got to do. Just draw that trusty elbow plane. And for those of you who aren't familiar with what he's talking about, the elbow plane is a line that goes from our hosel of the club up through the trail elbow here, or up through the elbow. Now, this line is only really accurate if you have the correct camera angle. It's very, very important to have the correct camera angle. You need to have this camera angle set up down your toe line, and you need to have it set up around waist level, and you want to have it set up far away enough to where you and the club never leave the frame. So this camera angle actually right here, even though it may be down my toe line, it's too high and it's too close. If I were to swing up to the top, you would see the club is going out of frame there. So it's too high, it's a little bit above eye level, and it's too close. So I would need to lower it, get a little bit further away, and then I could draw my elbow plane on there. Now, what I like to see is when that lead arm is parallel to the ground in the downswing, I like to see this club either parallel to or shallower to that elbow plane, and at least moving into a shallow position. So if you're like this, and then you're coming down like this, and this club is actually steepening in the downswing, and it's continuing to steepen in after that, that's not what we want to see. So there is some dynamics to it. It's not just as simple as pausing right here and wherever the club is, that's good. You also need to look at, how the club is moving to that position. Ideally, what we'd like to see is the club shallowing to that position, right? And that club is getting shallower to that elbow plane when you're getting there. If it's parallel to it, that's fine. It just needs to continue to stay that way all the way down. If you look at, there's a lot of players that are like that. Tiger, for example. Tiger does not have, it's not a clear, excessive, shallowing of the club. Some players you're going to see, wow, that club really, really shallows. And some players you're going to see it's very gradual, right? And some people are going to say, well, such and such doesn't shallow. Well, they are. It's just not as obvious because it's not going up to the top and then this. It's going up to the top and then it's that. Like that doesn't really look like shallowing to a lot of people, but it is. That club head is behind the hand. It's shallow. It's shallower to that elbow plane. So this is what we talk about in the move course. So if you want to work on the shallowing of the club, the reason why we want to do this is that if that club is steep, you're going to tend to stand up and flip to get that club back on plane. That's what I see most players do. Now, some players are going to be steep and then come over the top, but a lot of players are going to get steep and then they're going to know, okay, well, if I continue like this, I'm going to come over the top. So what they'll do is they'll stand up and you can see what happens. That gets my club now shallowing late, right? Gets that club underplane late. And because of that, I'm going to have to stand up out of my posture to make that happen. And when you stand up, you early release. Everything gets dependent on timing. You're adding loft. It just gets a little bit more difficult to be consistent. So that's why you don't see any tour players swing like that. You see all tour players basically stay in their posture, shallow the club, and then turn into the ball. So Matthew S. says, hey, Q, what type of yardage device do you use on the course? GPS device, rangefinder, brands? Thanks so much. So, the most accurate is going to be a rangefinder. I've really only used two in my lifetime. I've used the Bushnell. I had a Bushnell pin seeker, I think it was called. I had that thing for a long time. And I got a new one, or I got a new rangefinder and gave it to a buddy of mine. And he's still using it. So that thing is probably 15 years old. It's old. What I had, and it still works. And it's a tank, and it works just fine. And it's very, very accurate. The advantage of the rangefinders is that they're extremely accurate and they give you yardage to the pin, right? You're actually looking at something and you're getting yardage to the pin. The other advantage to a rangefinder is maybe you're on on a dog leg or something like that, and you can actually use the rangefinder to kind of see how far the trees are on a certain line. You go, no, okay, well, I know that I can't take that line with a driver because if I do, I'm going to hit it through the fairway, right? And maybe it tells you, okay, well, I need to hit a hybrid on this hole because I want to keep it in the fairway or something like that. So those are all things. I prefer the rangefinder. That's typically what I use for that reason. Now, GPS is not typically as accurate, but it can be very accurate. The thing with GPS is it's usually very convenient, right? There's a lot of devices out there. There's watches. There's all sorts of things that you can use with GPS. I know I played a lot of course. If a golf course has the GPS system like in the cart, I generally use that just because it's convenient. As long as it's accurate and it's to the pin, which a lot of them are nowadays. They give you the yardage to the pin, and basically I just test it the first couple holes to see how accurate it is. And if it's accurate, I'll just continue using it, right? And if it's off, sometimes they're off quite a bit. So, they can be off 10 yards. It's not uncommon. So I would say a rangefinder if you want to make sure that it is the correct yardage. And then the GPS would be, I mainly just use the GPS in the cart. I've never really used any other GPS or like SkyTrack or not SkyTrack or SkyCaddy. SkyCaddy makes SkyTrack. But yeah, as far as GPS devices, I don't have any recommendations there. But for rangefinders, Bushnell and Nikon make very good rangefinders. But I'm sure there are other good rangefinders as well. There's a lot of good ones out there. I know. I can't remember what it's called, but there's several good ones out there. But if you want what I've used and what I would recommend and what I've used, I would actually recommend. I'd say the Bushnell and the Nikon. They both are very good. So Brian P says, "Hi Q, I've been trying to get my hips moving from the top of the backswing, particularly focus on pushing my left hip back. Seems to be improving position at impact. Can you talk about the hips in the downswing?" Yeah, so basically, to use the hips properly, what we have to do is we have to flex the legs. When I see a lot of people do is they'll go up to the top right here, and then the first move down, there's no flex in the legs. It's automatically just an extension of the hips. So if you want to get your hips to be pivoting, to be rotating, what we have to do is from the top of the swing, we have to get some flex in the legs. Go look at basically any tour player's golf swing, and you're going to see they get up to the top. That trail leg is typically going to be straightened out a little bit, and then the start of the downswing, they go like this. Now, you know, you've probably heard of like the tiger squat, the Sneed squat, things like that. There are some players that will they'll really get down, and then there's some players that will just the flex will just go back, right? And it doesn't look like they're really like a very pronounced squatting. But that's what we need to do in the start of the downswing in order to get things moving. Because the moment you start to extend the hips forward is the moment you're not going to rotate. You will not rotate if you do that. So you need to get the flex in the legs and then try to stay in that flex and then extend later. So I found really the best way to think about the hips is that they're never moving closer to the golf ball. Never. I try to feel like they are never moving closer to the golf ball. So in the backswing, I feel like my hips move away. And then the start of the downswing, I especially feel like they're moving away. And then I feel like through impact, my hips actually move toward the target. So they move that way. So they're extending that way. So if they extend toward the golf ball at all, that's when they just will not rotate if you extend toward the golf ball. It's going to be very, very difficult. So you want to feel away, and then toward the target is where we're going to extend the hips. If you have any specific questions about the hips, I'm not going to go into total full detail because that could be like a half-hour discussion on how the hips move. But if you want if you have a specific question about how the hips move, I'll be happy to answer it. But you know, we're not going to go into crazy detail on all that. But Brian, if you have anything specific that you're having trouble with, I'll be happy to answer. Steve A says, relating to putting and location of eyes over the ball, does it matter which eye is dominant? I'm right-handed and am left eye dominant, which I set my eyes correctly over the ball using the eye line. It always feels like I'm set up to hit it left. Then I have no confidence when I putt. Any suggestions? I would just make sure both eyes are behind the golf ball on this side of the golf ball. So if I'm putting, so if you're right-handed and you're left eye dominant and you have your left eye on the target side of the ball, well, you're kind of looking back at the ball and then at the target. So that might be why you kind of feel like discombobulated a little bit. So I would just try to get to where your head is a little bit more behind the ball, right? More like this. And if you use something like a putting mirror, you know, something like this, a putting mirror, you can see where your eyes are located. So for me, I like to have, when I set up to putt here, I like to have my eyes, you know, roughly 2 or 3 inches on this side of the ball toward me. So I'm kind of looking out that way, and then both eyes behind the ball. So my lead eye, my left eye is going to be just slightly behind the ball, and then my right eye is going to be further back than that. And that, I feel like, allows me to really see everything, or to feel like, you know, I'm seeing the line correctly. If I get to where my head's like this, I feel like I'm kind of looking back this way, and I'm not seeing everything out front. So I want to get it to where I'm just kind of looking out and I can see everything. And if I get my eyes too far this way, going toward you, then I feel like I'm kind of looking back this way and then out that way. So if I get everything kind of behind and to the right, that allows me to see everything much, much more clearly here. So that's going to make things a lot easier. So if I get kind of squared up here, right? So I can kind of see everything that's going on here, and it just makes it a lot easier to see the line and make, you know, and and be confident when you're putting. So I'd use something like a putting mirror, just kind of set up over it and get your eyes on this side, right? So this side of the ball, and then on this side of the ball just a little bit. So like your lead eye being this way a little bit, and then you toward you a couple inches, where basically if I were to drop something, from my eyes, right, they would land behind and to the right of the golf ball. So you can see it landed about, I'm set up right here, and it landed about right there. So that means that my left eye is basically right there, and my right eye is right there. And I'm kind of looking out that way. That makes it a lot easier to see things. So I would try that and see if that helps with being able to see. So Oyewal O says, during the takeaway, is there a hand that is dominant? I'd say during the takeaway, it's more of a shoulder motion. It's and less of a hands that are doing anything. Your hands are just kind of holding on to the club, right? So you want to feel more shoulders in the backswing. Now, what's happening more there, what's literally happening is when you're doing that is your right hand is going to be more dominant. It's more pulling the club back, right? But you want to feel more, it's more of a shoulders kind of thing. Because if you feel hands, right, if you just feel, okay, my right hand's going to be dominant in the backswing, right, in my takeaway, you're probably going to do this. And that's not what you want. What I would feel like is that it's your shoulders turning. Those are the dominant thing in the backswing. And when you do that, you're going to feel how your right hand's probably doing more than your left hand when you're pulling that back. But I don't want you to think, generally, it's not a good thing to think, okay, right hand dominant in the takeaway because that's going to do that. And that's not what I want you to do. I want you to be going back with your shoulders, get a nice wide takeaway. The reason why there's a couple of reasons why you want to do that. One is it gets those shoulders moving right away. If you notice here, if I take my right hand and I dominate my takeaway, I'm not really turning my shoulders, right? So I want to make sure that I'm getting my shoulders to turn. And generally, if you don't get your shoulders turning right away, you're going to not really turn your shoulders at the top. So if I can get my shoulders turning very quickly in the backswing, that's going to ensure a good full power turn, which is one of the most important pieces for the top speed golf system. The other thing is that when I feel right hand dominant, right, if I feel like there's a hand dominating, a lot of times I'm going to hinge my wrist early, right? And when I do that, basically as soon as my wrists fully hinge, they're going to want to unhinge. So if I fully hinge as I go up here to the top, I'm going to want to unhinge right away. And that's also not what we want to do. We want to get some lag in the start of the downswing. This is another piece of the top speed golf system. I want to go nice and wide so that way my wrists hinge later in the start of the downswing. That's when I want to get that full hinge. Is in halfway down in my downswing, I'm going to be getting that full hinge. And this makes it a lot easier. If we go wide and feel like the shoulders are turning, that's going to make it a lot easier. So those are the things I like to see in the takeaway for power and speed and consistency. If we're casting the club, we're not going to get that compression on the golf ball. It just leads to much better things usually later on in the swing if we're getting a nice wide takeaway in the backswing. So I would feel more like your shoulders dominate your takeaway, and what you're going to feel in there is you're going to feel like your trail hand is pulling that club back. You're going to feel more pressure in that trail hand pulling that club back when you do that. And then he asked, during the downswing, is there a hand that is dominant? It depends on what part of the swing, right? So in this part of the swing, your right hand is going to be more dominant, right? And you're letting it go. And then in this part of the swing through impact, your left hand, your lead hand is going to be more dominant as you're letting it go. The way that I equate it is that it's like you're throwing a ball, right, with the trail hand, right? So back here, I'm fairly relaxed, and then I'm going to dominate that trail hand with that trail hand. I'm really dominant, and then I'm going to throw it and release it out in front. Right? I'm going like that. Right? So my hand is going bang. With the lead hand, it's more of the opposite. With my lead hand, I'm up here. I'm fairly relaxed, and then I'm pulling through, and then I'm letting it go, right? So it's happening a little bit later. I'm pulling up and in with that. So my lead hand's going to dominate more later in the swing as I pull up and in with that club. So what you likely need to do is, what's actually happening and what you're feeling like you're doing are typically going to be two different things. So what I described there is what is actually happening when we look at the better players, right? When we look at those who are really good ball strikers and get that compression. That trail hand is dominating in here, and that lead hand is dominating in here as they pull up and in with the club. That's the reality of what's going on. So what you need to do is you need to look at your swing on video and see, what's going on, and then adjust your feel to get the desired result that you want. If you are early releasing the club, if you're coming into impact and you're looking like this, that means that you're throwing the club too early. You're dominating the swing with your right hand too early, whereas you want to be more relaxed. And then in here is where you want to get that right hand and release it and throw it out in front. Just like if you were to kind of skip a rock across the water. That's what you want to feel like is going on. So hopefully that makes sense. But that's what's happening in the swing. There's not necessarily one hand that's dominant the entire swing. The reality is that both hands are going to play their roles in the swing, but you need to look on video and see what's going on, and you may need to adjust your feel to get the desired result. You may need to feel like your right hand does nothing, right, in the swing, like it's just along for the ride maybe, if it's doing too much. Because the reality of what will hopefully happen is that it will actually do what you want it to do. So Dave S says, what is the correct amount of grip pressure in the right hand and left hand to maximize lag, or rather get the correct amount of lag? So basically, it's hard to describe the amount of grip pressure that you want to have, but basically it goes like this. You want to have enough grip pressure to be able to hold on to the club and control it, but not so much that you can't move, right? So if you are someone who's casting the club right away, you're putting a lot of pressure in the wrong direction, not necessarily force into the club, but pressure in the wrong direction. You're pushing pressure out that way when you should be just putting pressure in the club to be able to control it, and then getting more pressure later on in the swing to release it, right? So you need to hold on to the club with enough pressure to be able to hold on to it, right? Because if I have super light pressure and I swing really fast, well, I'm just going to let the club go. It's going to slip out of my hands. So I need to put pressure into this handle to be able, and the more speed I have, the more pressure I need to put into it, right? But not so much that I can't move, right? If I'm gripping this club as hard as I possibly can, I'm not going to be able to move very freely when I do that. It's like if you make a fist, it's really difficult to turn your wrists, right? You want to make a fist enough pressure, but your wrist be able to move. So it's more about if you're casting the club, it's not because you're necessarily putting too much force into the handles, because you're putting force in the wrong directions, right? You're doing that, right? If you're casting, if you want to get lag, I feel like you're doing the opposite. I feel like you're pushing out that way with your hand and pulling in that way as you're coming down. That's what I would feel like, because you're going like this, right? If you're casting the club and not getting lag. Let's go into that a little bit more. So in order to get this club to do that, right? That's what we want it to do in the start of the downswing. We want it to do that, right? So you have to think about what forces will be needed to be put into this handle to be able to make the club do that. Well, one, if I do a force that goes that way, what does the club do? It does the opposite. And that's what a lot of people do when they cast the club. They bring the hands in a little bit. Not this exaggerated, but basically the force is going to go that way. So one, you need to feel like your hands are going out that way, right? And you can see when I did that, how that sharpened the angle. So that's what I would feel like first. First, my hands are going that way. The other thing is that you want the club to do this, right? So if you put a force this way with the lower hand, with the lead hand, and a force that way with the trail hand, that will do that. But if you do the opposite, that will cast. So if you're starting the downswing by pulling with your left hand, your lead hand, and pushing out with your right hand, and you're bringing your hands in, that's going to be cast city, right? But if you feel that the hands are going out away from you, and you are pushing with your lead hand and pulling with your trail hand, well, now look at the amount of force I can generate, or the amount of lag I can generate by having that proper feeling. So that's what you need to feel like is happening. So my hands are going out away from me, and I'm pushing with my lead hand and pulling with my trail hand to get that club to lag as I'm turning down. So Oilwall O says, during the takeaway, is the right hand fully extended or bent when the left hand is fully extended before you get to parallel? So generally when you get to parallel, like I said, you want to be nice and wide. So both wrists are kind of in a thumb down position. And then as far as the wrist being cupped or extended or anything like that, they're going to be fairly neutral. So I would just try to feel like your thumbs are more in a bent down position when you get to that lead arm or that club parallel position. So it's just thumbs down. If you have cup in the lead wrist and then bowing in that trail wrist, the club's going to be more like that, which is fine. You can play good golf doing that. You just need to get it back. If you look at a player like Matt Wolff, right? He brings the club kind of way out here and then brings it back, right? And if you bow the lead wrist and extend back the trail wrist with the thumbs down position, then you may bring the club a lot inside, which is fine if you're able to get down. So what we have to understand is that a good setup sets up a good backswing. A good backswing sets up a good downswing. A good downswing sets up a good impact. So if you're doing things in your setup that make you do certain things in the takeaway, that make you do certain things in the downswing, and make you do certain things at impact, and that's what you want to look at, right? So if you're doing something in your takeaway, but you still have a good downswing and impact, then you're fine, right? Because there are players that bring, like a Raymond Floyd, for example. Raymond Floyd brought this club way inside like this, got it up here, and then got it down perfectly in the downswing. That's what worked best for him. So there's not a one-size-fits-all kind of takeaway thing. The further you are away from impact is where you're going to see the biggest differences between the best players, right? So the takeaway is pretty far away from impact, right? The top of the swing's a little bit closer. You're going to see more similarities in great players, but it's still pretty far away from impact. Where you're going to see the biggest similarities in the best players is at impact. That's where you're going to see the biggest similarities between all of them, and just before impact. But the further you get away from it is where you're going to see more variances, because there's lots of ways to get to that impact position. And that's really what the top speed golf system is. The top speed golf system focuses on all of the things that are the most important. When you look at all these tour players, you're going to see the spine angles are going to be very similar. You're going to see that their shoulder turns are going to be very similar, right? We picked out all the things in the swing that we see basically all the tour players doing, and everything else in between that is kind of your own swing signature. If you look at someone like Jim Furyk, if you look at someone like Dustin Johnson, Tiger Woods, Adam Scott, Rory McIlroy, all of these guys have very different looking swings. Adam Scott and Tiger Woods have similar looking swings, but Rory McIlroy, Dustin Johnson, Jim Furyk, These guys all have very different looking swings. Look at John Daly, Justin Thomas, very, very different looking golf swings. What do they all have in common? They all have the top speed golf system in common. They're all doing the things that we talk about in the top speed golf system. So those are the things that are most important. Then everything in between there is kind of your own swing signature. So that's what I would really focus on, is getting those pieces in the top speed golf system correct, right? So in the takeaway, the most important things that we like to see in order to get a full power turn are to get that nice wide thumbs down takeaway. Now, if you bring the club out a little bit more out like this or a little bit more like that, either one of those is fine as long as it gets you to be in a good position at impact, right? It doesn't mean that if you're like this, it's 100% fine. If it leads to poor things at impact. If you're going in like this and then you're going like that because you're getting the club way too inside and then coming over the top, it may benefit you to feel this club going more outside and then in, because that's kind of the opposite, and to get you in a better impact position. So the top speed golf system is what are the most important things in the golf swing. Everything else is kind of your own swing signature, and it's not that doing the little things aren't going to help you specifically. It's just that those are the things where we see there's variances. There's huge variance in where the club is in the takeaway. There's huge variances in a lot of other things in the golf swing. So I would be focusing on the top speed golf system and getting those things to be correct. So Keith B says, just what is a reverse pivot? So a reverse pivot is essentially when you're going back in the backswing and you're kind of leaning toward the target. So you're getting all your weight kind of on your lead side. So your spine angles, you're kind of leaning toward the target at the top. You're getting all your weight on your lead side. This is a reverse pivot. All right. So you're getting like this. And the reason why we wouldn't necessarily want to be in that kind of position is you're going to tend to fall away in the downswing, right? To be able to get into a good position. We just don't see any good players that have a reverse pivot. It's just difficult to be consistent when you do that. It's not really an athletic way to move. Now, it's not to say that you can't have a reverse pivot and then kind of chop down into the ball and hit a good golf shot. You absolutely can, but I just don't see very many people being consistent. Most tour players, what you're going to see is as they go up the top, they're going to load up on that trail leg right away. They're going to get into a nice angled away position at the top, and they're going to shift their weight to their lead side, staying angled away with their spine and turning through the ball. That's what you're going to see with most tour players. You're not going to see this kind of action. And I've seen players do that and play fine golf, but when you do that, you're generally going to have to chop down into the ball and kind of stand up and flip, right, when you get to impact. And it just makes it difficult to be consistent when you do that. Not to mention, you'll tend to kind of come over the top as well. So it's hard to get the club to swing from the inside when you're doing that. All right, so let's keep going here. So Diane C says, any suggestions in how to shallow the club and avoid pulling down the club, which causes it to be more steep and can cause over the top? And Diane, this is kind of what we've been talking about. It's easier to shallow the club if your hands are deeper in the backswing. So there's advantages to having the hands very upright, and there's disadvantages to it. So basically, if your hands are way up here, Diane, like yours are, I'm only saying this because Diane's the Swinger View student of mine, and Diane's swing, she gets her hands really, really high. And I don't know if this is because it feels more powerful to her, or she went through our 20-minute distance fix course and did the skyscraper drill, or whatever it might be, or if it's just a natural thing for her to do. But her hands are way up here. So the advantage to having your hands way up high like this is that it gives you more space and time to accelerate the club, which can help you to create more speed and distance. The disadvantage to it is that if you're in this position here, you have to shallow. There's a lot more shallowing that you have to do in the start of the downswing. You really have to do a lot of movement. It makes it a little bit more difficult. So what you have to do is you have to find the happy medium that works for you, where you're able to get the club to swing down on plane, because Diane was kind of coming over the top a little bit, right? So we're trying to get Diane to swing more from the inside. And in order to do that, I would try. Now, what I'm trying to get her to do is feel like she's like this at the top. Feel like her arm is even below her shoulder plane, right? Now, that's not the reality of likely what she's going to do. Hopefully, she's going to be more in this kind of area where she doesn't have to shallow the club as much, right? So the more vertical you are, the more you have to shallow it, and the more difficult it can be to shallow it. So if you're having trouble with getting the club shallowed out, you could try a little bit flatter of a swing. You got to find the best of both worlds. If you look like a Bubba Watson is way up here, right? He gets that club really, really shallowed out in the downswing. Bubba Watson hits the ball a long way. Dustin Johnson, same kind of thing. But if you look at someone like a Rory or a Tiger or Adam Scott, they're more in this area, right? They don't have to do a ton of shallowing out the club to get it to be in a good position. And those guys are all powerful players as well. So you have to find the best area that works for you. So the more upright you are, the more you have to shallow the club. Now, from here, to get the club to shallow out, we need to basically flatten out the shaft, right? So if you go up to the top here and you pull your hands down like that, that's going to steepen the shaft. So you need to feel basically the club kind of laying down like this. So the club and the hands are kind of going behind you as you're starting down. So we don't want to feel the club, the right arm. Mainly it's the right arm. We need to feel the right arm kind of going like this. If we get the right arm going like that, that's when you're going to tip the shaft forward. So you really just need to feel the right arm basically doing this, where it's going down like that. So the elbow is kind of staying pointed down and staying like that. Whereas if I steepen the shaft, my elbow is going to point back behind me, and I'm going to go like that. I'm going to swing over the top. So you need to feel more of this, the elbow going down into the inside, feeling this kind of motion. So this is called external rotation of my arm. My elbow is turning that way. It's pointing more inward toward me. If I get it pointed outward away from me, that's internal rotation. That's going to be a steepening move. So the more you get up here, the more you got to do that, right? If I'm here, right, my arm is already a little bit into that position, right? And then there's a little bit less that I have to do in the downswing. So that's what I would encourage you to do, is to get those hands a lot deeper, get them more across your chest instead of higher. So Oywall O says, can you pre-shallow the club at address without having to manipulate at the top? Isn't this simpler since everything is so quick from the top hitting the ball? You can't really shallow the club at address. Shallow the club is in reference to how the club is moving in relationship to the plane. So there's not really anything you can do at address to pre-shallow it. Now, unfortunately, I think what you might be asking is, can you shallow the club in the backswing because things are moving slower? And unfortunately, generally, there's an equal and opposite reaction between your backswing and the downswing. So if you shallow, typically if you go up and you shallow the club in the backswing, that's going to lead to steepening in the downswing. So generally, it's actually better, typically, when you're going to look at most tour players, to steepen in the backswing and then shallow in the downswing, because that's going to get the forces kind of working in your favor. That's going to get, if I steepen, and then that's going to tend to shallow. If I shallow in the backswing, I'm going to tend to steepen in the downswing. Now, there are some players that do really shallow the club in the backswing. One would be like a Ricky Fowler, Daniel Berger. There are some good players that do that. But the forces are kind of working against you, and it's a difficult thing to do. So I don't recommend it. It typically doesn't work the best for most people, but it's certainly something you can try, as long as you're keeping that. The only thing that matters is having that club to be shallowing in the start of the downswing. So however you get there is completely fine, but I see more people have success with steepening, basically a steeper backswing, going steep to shallow as opposed to shallow, because it's just when you go shallow in the backswing, you're typically going to steepen in the downswing just because of the equal and opposite reaction there. So Pat I says, with a driver, I was instructed to keep your feet only a few inches beyond shoulder length. So are you talking about having your feet just outside your shoulders? I think that's what you're saying. Generally with a driver, that's what I like to see is the feet just a little bit, the insides of the feet just a little bit outside of shoulder width. That's generally what I like to see. Now I have broad shoulders, but someone who may have narrower shoulders, it may be more than that. But that's generally what I like to see. And then for an hour, or for an iron, for me, generally my heels are right outside my shoulders. That's generally where they are with iron. So this is kind of my iron stance. And then this is my driver stance where the inside of my feet are just outside the outside of my shoulders. If you were to draw a line straight down from my shoulders, you would see that they'd be just on the insides of my feet there. For an iron, they'd be basically going, the outside of my shoulders would be going straight down into my heels. And then for a wedge, I'm usually a little bit narrower. And the reason why I do that is to promote a little bit more downward angle of attack. Typically, the wider that you are with your stance, the more it's going to promote an upward angle of attack, which when I talk about angle of attack, I'm talking about how the club is working up into the golf ball or down into the ball, right? That's your angle of attack. That's the up and down movement of the club. So this would be a downward angle of attack, and then this would be an upward angle of attack, right? So the wider I am, the easier it is to basically stay behind the ball to hit up on it, which is advantageous with a driver, right? If I can hit up on it with a low amount of loft, then I can get less spin and get a good launch, and that's going to help me hit the golf ball further. Higher launch, lower spin is the best for distance with the driver. Driver, you're trying to hit that ball generally as far as possible. With an iron, you're trying to control how far it goes, right? You want to know the number. If you're trying to hit a 7-iron and you hit your 7-iron 180, that's how far you want to hit it. You don't want to hit it, 200. You want to hit it 180. So I generally will use a stance that will allow me to hit a little bit down on the ball, and then with a wedge, I like to flatten my wedges lower, hit a little bit more down on them with a little bit more spin. So if you get more down on it with loft, that helps you get more spin. And if I get my body a little bit more forward, a little bit more narrow, that makes it easier to do. And I like to hit my wedges lower, more flighted lower, because it's a little bit easier to control. So Matthew S says, hey Q, when you chip, is it okay for your wrist to break slightly, or should they be locked at all times? It's okay to let them break slightly. We don't want to have a lot. If you have a good lie and you're trying to come in nice and shallow, you don't want to have a lot of wrist break. But if you have a little bit of wrist break, that's completely fine, because that's still going to allow you to move really shallow. The only time I'd really want to unlock the wrists a lot, let them hinge a ton, is if I'm trying to kind of chop down on the golf ball. So that'd be a situation, maybe I'm in some deep rough, right? And I can't really get to the back of the ball, so I kind of have to kind of chop down and to get it up out of there. Whereas if I have a nice lie, I want to feel like I'm moving more of my shoulders and my body to chip the club instead of the arms. I want to use as little wrist as I can. We don't want to necessarily feel completely locked. We want to stay athletic, and we don't want to feel completely rigid with it. So go ahead and let that club hinge a little bit. That's completely fine. We just want to make sure that we come in nice and shallow with it so we can get those good crisp shots. Steve A says, thanks, I will try that suggestion regarding putting. No problem, Steve. So Stephen D says, I'm right-handed. When I look at my backswing from the front view, I notice that my right knee is moving backwards to the outside of my ankle. I may be doing this in an attempt to get a bigger turn, but it seems that it is making it more difficult to shift my weight forward. Can you give me a drill or advice to work on this? Yeah, so what you can do is you can take an alignment stick or a chair like this, and what you what you're likely doing is you're sliding your hips, and that's actually restricting. It's not allowing you to turn very much. So what you want to feel like is that you get a load in your trail leg, and then you push that hip back out of the way. So a good drill for you to do, you can do this at home. You know, just put your arms across your shoulders here, get a chair where it's, just barely not touching your hip, and then, put your arms across your shoulders and get that feeling where you're turning and loading up, but you're not touching the chair, right? You can take an alignment stick, put an alignment stick in the ground to where, again, it's barely not touching. And if you feel it touch, then right? So if I go like this and I slide my hips, I can definitely feel the chair moved, right? I can feel that chair on my hips. So what I want to feel like is that I'm barely not touching. I'm in my address position, and I want to get pressure and then turn away, right? I want to feel like my hips turning away from that. And you can see how I got a much bigger turn in my hips in doing that, right? I got a much bigger turn in my hips. Whereas if I slide, I don't turn my hips and I don't turn very much. So that's what I do. Put that outside your hip there, and it should help you, give you some feedback on whether you're turning instead of sliding. So Par N says, having problems with uneven lies. Par, I'd recommend checking out our special shots vault. We have videos on all of those. So uphill, downhill, side hill, below your feet, above your feet. We have a video for every single one of those. So if you want to check it out, click the instruction tab at the top, then click vault phrase, then go to the special shots vault. It should be toward the bottom, and then that will have all the videos that you need to work on those. Spartan goes on to say, uphill, downhill, OCH, ball above, makes weight transfer difficult, and blocking left pulls. Any suggestions? Yep. So check out those videos, instruction on all of those shots. Diane C says, thank you, Q. No problem. Mauricio R says, is it correct to pull down the trailing arm elbow at the start of the downswing in order to prevent casting the club and coming over the top? So if you pull like this, that's going to cast the club. So you want to feel like your lead arm is actually kind of going out away from you, and that you're pushing your hand out away from you. That's what I would try to feel like, is that you're pushing the hand out away from you. That's going to allow you to put force into this handle that's going to make the club not cast. If you feel like you're pulling down like this, that's going to cast the club. So that's probably not the feeling that you want to have. Another question here. Gary P says, I continue to sky my drives early in the round and also when I hit it harder. Any Band-Aids you could describe? So typically if you're popping up your drives, if it's because the low point of your swing is occurring at where the golf ball is. So with a driver, because the ball is teed up, we want to have our swing bottom out before the ball and then work up into the ball. So basically, if my fist is the golf ball, we want this club to come down, bottom out, and then work up. If you're popping it up, most likely what's happening is you're coming down and that club's bottoming out right here where the golf ball is and then working up. So a lot of times that comes from swinging over the top. When you swing over the top, it moves where that club bottoms out more toward the target. So if you imagine this, if I'm swinging 45 degrees over the top, where's my club going to bottom out? It's going to bottom out over there. If I swing 45 degrees from the inside, my club's going to bottom out back here. So you need to swing more from the inside, most likely, to get that. So I check your spine angles, right? Make sure that you're angled the way I address. Make sure your body's not opened up. Make sure you're not like this, that everything's nice and squared up, or maybe even angled to the right a little bit, assuming you're a right-handed golfer. That's going to promote more of an inside path to the ball, which will allow you to have that club bottom out more before the ball. And a lot of times when people try to swing harder, they'll swing over the top when you do that, right? Because they'll typically swing more upper body. They'll try to swing quicker. So that's more than likely what's happening. So I'd look at your swing on video, see if you're coming over the top. And if you are, then I would work on getting the club to work more from the inside and have the feeling that you're trying to drive up into the golf ball. You're letting that club bottom out and then driving up into the golf ball. And it should help out quite a bit with those pop-ups. If you want to work on like a series of drills to get that working a little bit better, I'd recommend the Never Slice Again course. That course is all about getting that club to work more from the inside. So if you want to check that out, click the house icon at the top. that'll take you to the home page. Scroll down the home page, and you'll see a list of all the courses there. And select the Never Slice Again course to get started on those drills. Diane C says, if your clubs are a ½ inch longer and you choke down, do you see any potential problem that it could cause, or is it fine? It's fine. You won't swing the clubs as fast. So the longer the club, generally the faster it's going to go. If you imagine a fan, right? So a fan, the tips of the fan blades are going to be spinning a lot faster than the inner portions of the fan blades. So that's like the difference between your driver and a wedge, right? This driver is about a foot longer than this wedge. I swing this wedge a lot slower than I swing this driver, right? Because of that reason. It's not necessarily because of the weights of the club or anything. It's more about, if this wedge was a foot longer, I'd probably be able to swing it very close to the same speed as I do the driver. So it's more about the length of the club. So if you choke down on a club, it's generally going to make, and you swing with the same amount of effort, right? It's generally going to make the club go slower, right? Which is less speed is going to equate to less distance. So choking up on the club is something that I do sometimes when I'm trying to take a little bit off. So let's say, I'm between a 7-iron and an 8-iron. A lot of times what I like to do is I like to use the extra club. So I don't have to feel like I have to muscle up a club or swing as hard as I can with an 8-iron. And then I choke down on it. So that way it does a couple things. One, it takes off the speed, right? It takes a little bit of speed off, which will help me take that down. And I can take a nice, normal, easy swing, and the ball will go lower than it normally will, which will give me a little bit more control. Whereas if I take the longer club, I have to swing harder, which is I'm going to have less control of that. And because I'm swinging harder with more loft, it's going to go higher too, which in some situations can be bad. Now, if I'm in a situation where I need to hit it high, right, and I'm in between clubs and I want to hit it high, well, then I would do the lower club and I would swing harder. But in most situations, you don't need to hit it high for some reason. You're looking to hit it lower. The only reason, there'd be two reasons why I'd be trying to hit it high. One would be if I need to hit it over something. Another reason would be if it was like a front pin. To a front pin, I like to hit it higher because the ball will generally sit a little bit better. It won't kind of run out. So I can land it all the way on the green, and then the ball will more than likely sit right there. Whereas if I were to hit a really low one in there and the pin's in the front, in order to get it close, you might not be able to land it on the green, depending on the conditions. If it's firm conditions, you may have to land it, short. So, that would be a situation where you might want to hit it higher, and where I would take a club with more loft and swing harder if I needed to. All right, so Diane sees very helpful Q. Thanks, no problem. So we'll wrap it up there for today. Thanks everybody for joining me. We'll be back here tomorrow, Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Everybody have a good rest of your day, and I will talk to you all next time.